I'm Ethan Cole, and for the past 5 years, I've been the quiet workhorse of Halden and Price Financial. Every morning, I arrived before sunrise to prepare reports that my boss, Martin Drake, would later present as if he personally wrote every line. Martin had that slick, magnetic charm that made people overlook the way he cut corners and rewrote history. He knew how to make you feel small with just a smile, how to praise you publicly but belittle you in private. And despite knowing exactly who he was, I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, he'd eventually see me as something other than a disposable assistant. The office itself had become a kind of stage for Martin's performances. He strutted through the glass hallways with perfect posture, designer suits, and a voice that carried just enough warmth to sound respectable. Meanwhile, people like me, analysts drowning in spreadsheets, were the unseen machinery making everything run. My closest allies were Sophia Kim, a data specialist with an instinct for patterns, and Daniel Ortiz, a senior analyst who'd been with the company longer than anyone cared to remember. They'd both pulled me aside more than once, warning me not to trust Martin too much, but I always shrugged it off, believing hard work would shield me. But the first real crack in that optimism appeared one Tuesday morning during a project update meeting. I had spent 3 weeks preparing a complex revenue flow model for a major client presentation. Martin had approved every step of the process, nodding along, pretending to understand the math he never bothered to learn. So when he stood in front of the boardroom and announced with a confident flourish that he had developed the model personally and that Ethan helped with some minor formatting, I felt the room tilt slightly beneath me. The board applauded, impressed by Martin's supposed brilliance, while I sat there with a pen in my hand and a knot forming in my throat. Things only escalated from there. Whenever something went well, Martin took credit. Whenever something slipped, he strategically positioned me as the weak link. I caught snippets of conversations, quiet whispers from colleagues saying things like, "Ethan's good, but Martin says he's been dropping the ball lately." Each overheard comment felt like another stone added to the weight, dragging me down. Sophia noticed my growing frustration, and one afternoon she whispered, "He's doing it on purpose, Ethan. He's setting you up for something." Her tone was gentle but serious, and the way she avoided meeting my eyes made my stomach twist uncomfortably. The real blow came during a quarterly review meeting with the board. Martin had insisted that I present the updated financial risk assessment, a task I was proud of, since it had taken countless late nights to fine-tune every detail. I walked in with confidence, ready to prove myself. But before I could even open the first slide, Martin cleared his throat and announced, "Before Ethan begins, I want to address a concerning discrepancy." The room went still, every head turning toward him as he projected several flagged transactions onto the screen. "These inconsistencies were found in reports Ethan prepared," he said, his voice grave, his expression crafted to look disappointed rather than accusatory. My heart dropped. I didn't recognize the numbers. None of the flagged transactions were mine. They weren't even from the departments I handled. But Martin clicked through them methodically, weaving a narrative that made it sound like I had mishandled funds. Board members exchanged sharp looks. My cheeks grew hot, my pulse thundering in my ears. When I tried to speak, Martin cut me off with a calm, dismissive gesture. "We'll allow Ethan to clarify during his performance review next week," he said smoothly. "For now, let's move forward." And with that, he stripped me of credibility in a single breath. After the meeting, I sat at my desk in stunned silence. The office buzzed around me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, co-workers murmuring, but it all sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. Daniel quietly approached and placed a folder beside me. "Look at the dates," he murmured before walking away. Inside were printed copies of the flagged transactions Martin showed the board. And when I checked the system timestamps, my blood ran cold. The entries had been modified after midnight hours when only one person in the department had late-night system access. Martin. That was the moment everything changed. The next morning, I walked into the office with a tightness in my chest that felt almost physical, like something was pressing down on my ribs. People glanced at me the way you look at someone who's already halfway out the door, a mixture of pity and curiosity. Martin wasn't in yet, which was unusual. He usually arrived early just to make sure everyone saw him being dedicated. I sat at my desk, opened the system logs again, and stared at the timestamps. The more I looked at them, the more they felt like fingerprints carelessly left, but unmistakably incriminating. Sophia stopped by my desk with 2 coffees, pretending to be casual, but I saw the tension in the way she held her shoulders. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered, sliding 1 cup toward me. There was fear in her voice, not for herself, but for me, and that only made everything feel heavier. "He must think you'll just take it," she added. Her words settled deep, amplifying the humiliation from the board meeting. I hated that Martin had gotten into my head this badly. When Martin finally arrived, he made a point of stopping by my desk, leaning on the divider like he owned the air around us. "Rough day yesterday, huh?" he said with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. I kept my expression neutral, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Then he lowered his voice. "Let's keep things smooth between us until your review. I'd hate for this little hiccup to damage your career permanently." His tone was soft, almost gentle, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. I felt a bitter taste rise in my mouth as he walked away, whistling like nothing had happened. For the rest of the morning, I worked mechanically, going through motions without really processing anything. Every now and then, I felt eyes on me coworkers wondering what I'd done, whether I was guilty, whether Martin was right. Shame burned under my skin. Even though I'd done nothing wrong, I kept replaying the boardroom scene in my mind. The disappointment in their faces, the way Martin positioned himself as the responsible leader cleaning up after a reckless subordinate. But beneath the humiliation, something else began to form. Anger, sharp enough to cut through the fog. It wasn't until lunch that Daniel approached me again, his face lined with concern. We sat in the nearly empty break room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like an accusation. "I've been thinking about it," he began slowly, drumming his fingers on the table. "Martin's been using your work for years, but framing you? That's new." His eyes narrowed. "There's something bigger happening. People don't take that kind of risk unless they're covering up something worse." His words sent a shiver down my spine. After lunch, I returned to my desk and pulled up old audit logs, something I normally never had reason to look at. But now, every detail mattered. As I combed through past entries, a strange pattern started to emerge. Every quarter, right before major board presentations, certain data files showed edits made between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., always by the same account, Martin's. At first glance, the changes looked minor, almost insignificant. But when I compared the numbers more closely, I saw subtle inflation of projected revenue, slight underreporting of liabilities, and strategic rounding that painted a picture far brighter than reality. My stomach twisted as the implications hit me. If these discrepancies were what I thought they were, Martin had been manipulating financial reports for at least 2 years. Before I could even process the realization, Martin called an impromptu team meeting. He stood at the front of the small conference room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the group with a self-satisfied glint. "I know yesterday's incident was uncomfortable for everyone," he began with feigned sincerity. "But rest assured, we'll get to the bottom of it. Integrity is everything at this company." His gaze landed on me just a second too long, enough to make everyone else shift uncomfortably. It felt like he was publicly stamping me as guilty. As the meeting dragged on, Martin continued to posture, emphasizing how strict oversight would be implemented moving forward. It was clear he wanted to isolate me further, to make sure no one doubted his narrative. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, frustration building with every smug word he spoke. Sophia kept glancing my way, silently urging me to stay calm. But inside, something was shifting, something resolute, something that had been dormant under years of forced humility. When the meeting finally ended, I stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard as the room emptied. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the air felt cold. I couldn't shake the sense that Martin was tightening a noose around my career, one knot at a time. But I also couldn't ignore what I'd found in those logs. The truth was sitting right in front of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. Because if Martin was hiding something this big, I was going to find it. I barely slept the night after uncovering those suspicious late-night edits. Every time I closed my eyes, the numbers replayed behind my eyelids like a haunting real digits shifting, accounts swelling and shrinking under Martin's hand. By morning, exhaustion and adrenaline were mixing in my bloodstream, creating a jittery tension that made everything feel too sharp, too bright. I got to the office early, hoping to look through more logs before anyone else arrived. But as soon as I logged in, my screen filled with a message I'd never seen before. Access restricted. Authorization revoked. My heart plummeted. Panic washed through me as I tried again and again, only to hit the same brick wall. Martin had cut my access. He must have known I was digging. I felt the walls of my cubicle closing in, my breath quickening as I glanced around. The office was still mostly empty, but every sound, the hum of the air system, the click of a distant keyboard felt like a threat. When Sophia walked in and saw my screen, she froze. "Oh no," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and it made my stomach twist even tighter. We stepped into a quiet corner near the back copy room, the only place without floor-to-ceiling glass walls. "He's ahead of us," I said, rubbing my temples. "He knows I'm onto something." Sophia folded her arms, her brow creased with worry. "Then you need to decide how far you're willing to go," she said softly. "If he's altering financial statements, this isn't a company issue anymore, it's criminal." The word felt heavy between us, hanging in the air like smoke. That was when Daniel joined us, shutting the copy room door behind him. He looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. "I've been doing some digging too," he said, pulling out a flash drive from his pocket. "You didn't hear this from me, but I used my old admin privileges. I found something. Actually, I found a lot." His whisper was low, cautious. My pulse quickened as he plugged the drive into the computer. The files he opened were from an internal audit conducted 2 years earlier, one that had mysteriously disappeared before reaching the board. The report detailed unexplained cash flow inconsistencies, all traced back to departments Martin oversaw. But the most damning part was a set of emails between Martin and a private investor group, where he hinted at managing perceptions to maintain company valuation. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. The man who humiliated me, who tried to frame me, had been falsifying company data to manipulate investor interest. But the worst blow came when we opened a folder labeled Q4 Projections, Martin, Private. Inside was a spreadsheet showing the company's true financial trajectory, far below what Martin had been presenting to the board. If the discrepancy ever came to light, it could trigger investigations, lawsuits, and potentially tank the entire company. He wasn't just corrupt, he was dangerous. As we stood there, the weight of the discovery crashed over me. My humiliation, the lies he told about me, the way he positioned me as incompetent, it all served one purpose: to keep me quiet, to keep me out of the way. And suddenly, everything made sense. "He thinks he can pin this on me," I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign, distant. "If the numbers collapse, he already laid the groundwork to blame me for tampering." Before either of them could respond, a knock startled us. The door opened, and Martin stepped inside, smiling that polished, insincere smile that always made my skin crawl. "Team huddle?" he asked, pretending not to notice Daniel yanking the flash drive from the computer. His eyes were cold despite the grin. "Ethan, I need to see you in my office. Now." The tone was casual, but the order beneath it was sharp enough to draw blood. Sophia shot me a panicked look. I followed Martin down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When we entered his office, he closed the door slowly, deliberately, then turned to face me with a look of smug victory. "You've been very busy," he said, clasping his hands behind his back. "Accessing files you're not authorized to view, speaking to people who have no business discussing internal data." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I could end your career today, Ethan." Something inside me snapped, but not in a reckless way, more like a final clean break. I met his gaze without flinching. "You already tried," I said. My voice was steady. "And you failed." Martin's expression faltered for just a split second, and in that moment, I knew he was afraid. Not of me, but of what he thought I knew. And he was right to be. Martin didn't respond right away. He just stared at me with an expression that flickered between annoyance and something that looked suspiciously like panic. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning vent behind me. Eventually, he straightened his tie and forced his features back into that calm, in-control expression he always wore around the board. "Let's not turn this into something dramatic," he said smoothly. You're upset, I get it. But you should be careful not to throw accusations you can't back up. I felt the heat rising in my face, but I held my ground, refusing to let him see how much I wanted to lunge across the desk and shake the truth out of him. Instead, I kept my tone controlled. I haven't accused you of anything, I replied. But you know what you've done, and soon other people will too. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and it was the tiniest crack in his facade, but it was enough to confirm I'd hit a nerve. Is that a threat? He asked, voice dropping. It's a fact, I said simply. He moved around his desk then, standing far too close, trying to use his height and posture to intimidate me. There was a faint scent of his cologne, expensive and sharp, filling the space between us. You don't understand the game you're playing, he murmured. If this gets messy, the company will choose me over you every time. I didn't blink. Not if the evidence speaks louder than you. That was when he laughed, a low, smug sound that made my blood run cold. He walked back to his chair, sat down, and leaned back with his hands behind his head. Ethan, even if you had anything, which you don't, it won't matter. I've already spoken to HR. Your performance review next week? It's been moved up. He paused for effect. To today. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral, refusing to show fear. He slid a document folder across the desk. This outlines a series of concerns regarding your work quality, professionalism, and reliability, he announced. Sign it, and we can negotiate a quiet exit package. Refuse, and the board will hear about your errors and misconduct. Every word dripped with false pity, the same tone someone might use for a misbehaving child. I felt anger pulsing under my skin, but it was strangely steady, focused. He thought he had me cornered, but he didn't know what Daniel, Sophia, and I had found. I stood up slowly, feeling something inside me shift like the resignation that had weighed me down for months was lifting. I placed both hands on his desk and leaned forward just enough to make him subtly recoil. Martin, I said quietly, you're using the wrong strategy. Because if you push this, then I will have to bring up the late-night system edits. His face froze, and the deleted audit, and the investor emails. Every muscle in his jaw seemed to lock at once. For a brief moment, the mask slipped completely. His eyes widened, and I saw raw fear flash across them like lightning. Then, just as quickly, he rearranged his expression into something colder, harder. You have no proof, he said. Whatever you think you saw, it won't hold. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I let the silence answer for me. Sometimes, silence is louder than any accusation. Suddenly, he lunged for his keyboard, typing rapidly, eyes glued to the screen. I stepped closer, watching the panic take hold as he scanned through folders, logs, and system access records. Where is it? He muttered under his breath. He clicked more frantically. Where the hell is it? His fingers flew like he was trying to stop a train sliding off a cliff. He finally looked at me, breathing hard. What did you steal? He demanded. I just stared back. Nothing, I said. But you should ask yourself why you're so afraid. For a moment, he seemed to deflate. His shoulders sagged. His gaze dropped to his desk, and the tension draining from him was almost visible. He whispered, You don't know what you're doing. But I did. For the first time in a long time, I actually did. Martin was terrified, and that told me everything I needed to know. But as I turned to leave his office, he delivered one final blow. If you take this any further, Ethan, you won't just be risking your job. You'll be risking the entire company. And that was when I realized something chilling. Martin wasn't trying to protect himself anymore. He was trying to protect whatever he'd been hiding all along. I walked out of Martin's office with my pulse pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in my ears. His final warning kept replaying in my mind. But instead of scaring me into silence, it only sharpened my resolve. If the company was at risk, it wasn't because of me, it was because of him. I could feel the shift inside myself. The transformation from being the quiet workhorse he relied on to the one person capable of pulling the thread that would unravel every lie he'd woven. And after everything he'd done to me, I wasn't going to hesitate anymore. By mid-afternoon, I had a plan. Daniel agreed to finish compiling the most critical files, things we knew would be irrefutable. Screenshots of hidden audits, system logs showing late-night edits, and the emails that tied everything together. Meanwhile, Sophia was already in touch with the internal compliance officer, a woman named Janet Price, who had a reputation for being fair but unshakably thorough. We didn't tell her everything up front. We only said it involved potential data manipulation and investor deception. Janet scheduled a confidential meeting for that same evening, long after the office closed. The tension among the three of us was electric, but underneath it was a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When 7 p.m. rolled around, the building was nearly empty. Only a few lights glowed through the glass walls as we stepped into the small conference room Janet used for sensitive reviews. She greeted us with a steady, unreadable expression. "You said this can't wait?" she asked. Daniel handed her the flash drive without a word. As she plugged it in, the room felt smaller, the silence heavier. I could hear the air conditioning buzz above us, could feel a bead of sweat roll between my shoulder blades. Janet reviewed the files slowly, methodically, her eyes narrowing every now and then as she clicked through folder after folder. The room remained silent, except for the occasional sharp inhale she tried and failed to hide. When she finally leaned back in her chair, her expression had changed entirely. She looked at me first, then at Daniel and Sophia. "Do you realize the scope of what you've uncovered?" she asked quietly. I nodded, even though the truth was I didn't nod fully. But I knew one thing. Martin had been lying, and now someone with real power saw it too. Janet closed the laptop and stood. "I need to initiate an emergency audit," she said. "You three are not to speak to anyone until I give the green light. If this is what it appears to be, the board will need to be informed immediately." Her tone held no hesitation. No doubt. In that moment, I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For the first time, someone believed me. Someone saw the truth. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. As we stepped out of the room, we found Martin standing at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, expression cold enough to freeze the air around him. "Working late?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Janet immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Drake, we'll need to speak in my office," she said without offering further explanation. But Martin wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on me, dark with fury and something far more dangerous. Fear. He followed Janet without a word. But the way he moved, stiff, rigid, jaw clenched, told me he already knew the truth was slipping out of his hands. The next morning, the building buzzed with an energy unlike anything I'd experienced there. People whispered in clusters, eyes darting toward Martin's office, which remained closed with blinds drawn tight. The board was already on site, summoned before sunrise for an emergency session. Reports circulated that Martin had been called in first. I sat at my desk, hands trembling slightly as I tried to focus on my work. Sophia and Daniel sat nearby, equally anxious, waiting for whatever happened next. 2 hours later, the door to the boardroom opened. Martin walked out pale, sweating, and visibly shaken. He didn't look at anyone. He just headed straight for his office and closed the door with a hollow thud. Then Janet stepped out behind him and gestured for me to come forward. Inside the boardroom, the directors sat stiffly around the long table, their expressions stern and unreadable. The chairman, Mr. Halden, motioned for me to sit. "Mr. Cole," he began, "we've reviewed the evidence provided by compliance." My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. "Your work over the past years has been exemplary, and your decision to come forward has likely prevented catastrophic consequences for this company." His voice softened. "You have our gratitude." I let out a slow breath I'd been holding for months. Then he delivered the final blow not to me, but to Martin. Effective immediately, Martin Drake is terminated and will face a full external investigation. Additionally, we are promoting you to Interim Director of Financial Analytics until a permanent replacement is chosen. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I could only sit there, stunned, as everything I'd endured twisted into something unrecognizably victorious. As I left the room, I saw Martin being escorted out, eyes wild with disbelief, his carefully polished life crumbling in real time. And as he passed me, he whispered, "You ruined everything." I didn't flinch. "You did that yourself," I said.